So everyone thinks their car deal is clever, whether it's 0% finance, dealer discounts, EV schemes, but when you run the numbers, it's interesting to see the differences and the total cost. So in this video, I'm going to show you the different ways of buying the car, how to calculate it, so you can make the right choice for you, because each option has its pros and cons, and it doesn't always come down to money. There are 5 main ways to buy a car, and I'm going to talk you through each of them. The first option is buying outright. So you can pay once and then you'll own it. There'll be no interest paid to anyone, but your cash is kind of locked into the purchase. There'll be a high depreciation if it's new, less so if you're buying secondhand. The second option is hire purchase, HP. Now, you put a big deposit down, maybe 10, 20%, then you have monthly payments, and then you own it at the end of the agreement. Now, you've paid the car off in full, plus the interest. So the third option is PCP. Now, you're paying for depreciation here only, but there is an optional balloon payment or a final lump sum payment. And then you can either keep it, give it back, or trade it in. The fourth option is a lease. Now, this is purely just a rental. You hand it back at the end and you pay for the depreciation and the usage that you signed up to, depending on the amount of mileage that you agreed to, and if you go over or under that. The fifth option is a company car rental scheme. Now, you pay for it through deductions of your salary, through your gross salary, and you exchange it for a car, which normally comes with all the costs included except your private mileage. And then on top of that, you pay for the benefit in kind, the BIC. So for me, the question isn't about what looks cheaper monthly, it's about which has the lowest total cost of ownership over the time you own it and actually use it. Now, before you choose which option to go for, you should really sort of ask yourself 6 key questions here. How long do you want to keep the car? Because if you're going to keep it less than 3 years, then maybe a lease is best for you. If you're going to buy and hold it for, say, 6 years plus, then buying the car is probably the best option here. Mileage is another consideration, so you need to know how many miles a year you're going to be doing. If you're going to be doing high mileage, then owning it will win outright. If you've got a lease, typically they have lower mileage per annum, 8 to 10,000 miles. So if you're going to be doing a lot more than that, it's going to cost you a lot more in the lease because it affects the depreciation and the value of the car. The other thing about a lease, if you're going to be doing high mileage, say 15 and 20,000 miles, the penalties just destroy the mass. And really, if you're a high mileage user, then really the stronger case is to buy outright or go to the hire purchase option. The third question is around convenience and control. So, some people just want hassle-free, which is, what a lease is designed for. You can get a car every 3 years. Most of the stuff is covered by the lease company. And so basically you get a car, pay your price, every single month of the fixed repayments, and then you hand it back. That is a convenience, but typically these are more expensive because you're basically paying a premium for that and for that convenience. The fourth question really is around cash flow. So cash flow is really important for most people, living paycheck to paycheck, how much money they have each month. So this could be a big thing for you. So typically, if you want cash flow, you're kind of looking towards more of a lease. But if you want lower total cost or spend over the total period of owning that car, then there might be other options that are more suited. Before you buy anything, think about potentially the next sort of 4 or 5 years of your life, what that's going to potentially entail, and therefore maybe what type of car, what type of agreement you want that will suit those circumstances too. You've got to think about what suits your time horizon, your life circumstances, and don't just do what the dealer's offering or looking at the deal sheet that he's offering you. And lastly, the sixth question is obviously do the ratios work? So if you haven't seen my first video, which is around affordability of a car, please go and watch that. But in summary, we're going to be trying to keep the cost of this car to maximum 25 to 35% of your take-home salary. Or a better option is looking at your fixed costs. So if all of your fixed costs, so that could be your rent or your mortgage and all the costs associated with those, all of your bills, your actual car agreement, whatever that might end up being, childcare, etc., anything that's fixed, that has to be less than 60% of your take-home pay. So if it's more than that, then you need to balance that with whichever option you're going to kind of compromise on, potentially the car. So I need to state that we're going to be going through a number of calculations and options today, and these are just examples. So whatever you do, when you get any kind of agreement or before you sign anything, you need to look at the terms that you're kind of signing up to. So even from the same lender, they might have different rates between different types of options. They might have 6.9% for a PCP versus 5.9% for an HP agreement. And all of these terms will have a big impact on what the best option ends up being and what the total cost of ownership is. So please check the numbers before you sign anything, work out the cost for yourself, and don't be afraid to challenge the person offering you the deal. If you can do this, this is where your credibility shines. The dealers will tend to push things that best suit them. They particularly are keen on doing things like PCP agreements because they profit both on the financing and the car itself. They'll tweak the deposits, they'll throw in contributions, they might change the spec a little bit to get you excited, but basically they're trying to maximize the profits for them and keep you in that loop forever of buying continuously. Now, this isn't evil, this isn't sort of some manipulation as such, but it is part of the business model. This is business for them, so you should know the numbers before you sign. So we're going to start with salary sacrifice because I feel like it's a really good opportunity. If you can do this, you could save significant sums against a personal financial agreement. So how does it work? So you sacrifice your gross salary, which will be defined by your company. You might have a company allowance, and that will vary depending on the band you're at. Some companies will allow you to move up or down or exchange part for cash, but you can either take it as cash or you can trade it in for a car. Now, it's only valid for the time you're working for the company, but it comes off your gross salary. Now, this is amazing because it's pre-tax. So we're going to look at numbers for an example on an EV car scheme. So imagine you had £500 allowance every single month. Now, if you took that as cash, it would be treated like your salary. So effectively you get taxed. Now, typically, if you're getting that sort of allowance, you're probably in a 40% tax band, which means you're paying the 40% tax plus you're paying NI, which at the moment is 2% in the UK. So 42% of that you're paying straight away as tax and only getting 58% back. So what does that work out to? Well, that's £290 a month after tax, which is a reasonable amount of money if you want that as income, but £290 won't get you much on a lease deal. So for me, £290 won't get you much of a lease. It might get you a small car, but it won't get you much of a car. And then you've got to pay all your other costs on top, like insurance, tax, MOT, etc. Or, depending on the type of deal, you might have to pay for most of those things. How does it work? So for that £500, that £500 goes to the company providing the car or the lease scheme. So they're getting the full £500. So they're getting, what you would have paid if you paid £500 privately. But what it's costing you is just the net after tax. So you're basically foregoing £290 to basically have a car, which will likely include everything other than your private mileage. So, breakdown, tax, insurance, literally everything generally. And this is an amazing deal really, because basically you're saving tax. So we're going to talk about buying a car outright. So we're going to use a £35,000 example of a typical medium-sized car where you put 100% down and selling it for 16 to keep it consistent, which means you spent 19,000 over the 4 years. So that's the cheapest by far, but obviously you've had money that's been tied up in the purchase of the car. Sometimes people refer to money, being tied up as an opportunity cost, something you could have invested to got some return on it. Now this is true and it's easy to explain because it's do something, do nothing. But technically, all of these options, you're putting 20% down, which is £7,000 you could have invested, plus every single month you're paying money which you could have invested. So there is an opportunity cost in all of these, though that others are harder to model and explain. So we've kind of kept this consistent. And lastly, obviously buying a second-hand, you lose up to 50% in the first few years. As soon as you turn the keys in a forecourt, you could lose 25-30% depending on the car. So, think about that before you buy new. And if you want to buy secondhand, then obviously it makes the deal even more favourable, because instead of paying 35,000, you might be paying sub 30, maybe more than 25, but in that sort of 25 to 30,000 pound range for the same car. And effectively the cost over those 4-year term is significantly less because you've already not had to pay for that depreciation. So we're going to look at HP now. So hire purchase. So we're going to use the same example of a £35,000 car with 20% deposit, 6.9% APR, and 4-year term, so 48 months. So what does this give us? So we've got a car of 35,000, deposit of 7,000, our PV is 28,000, term 48. We're selling the car for 16, and that is essentially going to give us a monthly repayment of £666.49. Our total cost for keeping the car is £38,991, which is the deposit plus all the repayments. Now we can choose to sell the car for 16,000, which will give us a total spend after we sold the car of 22,991. That's the deposit, the repayments, and then what we get back from selling it. Now the thing about an HP is that obviously at the end you can own the car if you choose. Next, a lease. So again, 35,000, 20% deposit, same APR, same term. So here, the £376.50, which is a total amount of repayments of £18,072. So basically, if you return the car, which is basically what a lease is, A lease is where you return the car, so your deposits and your payments total all in is £25,072. Now there'll also potentially be some admin charges and return fees on top of that, which might be another £100 or so, but again you need to check the T's and C's. Now why are these payments less? Because you're only paying for the car's depreciation and those fees. Next is PCP. So again, staying with the same example, 35,000, 20% deposit, same APR, and for your term, our monthly payments are £374.85, which is £17,992.80 for the monthly payments. Now with the PCP, you have an option of a balloon payment, which is the final lump sum. Now we've again assumed it's £16,000 to keep it consistent, which means if you return the car, your total spend over that 4 years is £24,993. If you keep the car, obviously you're paying that £16,000. It's £40,993. Now, PCPs is, as stated, the one that the dealers push. It's the most lucrative for them, keeps you in the upgrade loop. Definitely be most wary of this, and not because it's the worst, but because obviously they're going to try and manipulate numbers and try and get you to get into this loophole. It's definitely where they make their money. So yeah, be wary of that from a total cost perspective. Make sure you get the numbers. If you plan to keep the car on the long term, now the hire purchase probably works out cheaper than the PCP, and certainly buying outright if you're going to keep it long term is the best option here. So looking at the 5 options, we've got buying, which is £35,000 but getting £16,000 back. So you've spent £19,000 over the 4 years. Lease, return, so you spent £25,072 but you've given the car back. HP, you own it and then sell it, so that's £38,991. But if you do sell it back and you don't pay that balloon payment, you've only spent £22,991. So far that's cheaper than the lease on these terms. PCP and returning it, you're spending £40,993 if you keep it, and £24,993 if you don't and return the car. So just looking at these 5 options, the cheapest by far is buying outright, albeit you're foregoing money you could have invested, which might balance that out a bit. The next is HP, so that's owning it and selling it. Then PCP, it's nearly £25,000, and then the lease is actually the most expensive, just over £25,000. Now you'd expect that because you're basically paying for the privilege of having a new car every 3 years and the convenience of that. So now we're going to look at when to lease, when to buy, or not at all. So if you are a high tax band and you have access to a company car scheme, then maybe getting an EV on that, on salary sacrifice, is the cheapest for you. It has all the benefits of de-risking any kind of form of ownership of it. You can give it back when you leave. The obligation sits with the company and not yourself. You can get a much better car for the money, often for a lot less than you'd have to pay for a private car yourself, and you can get a much better car than you could have paid for yourself. Now, if you don't have access to a company car scheme, but you're doing low mileage and you're kind of an urban driver, then maybe getting a lease or an EV on a PCP scheme would be best for you, particularly if you're doing lower usage, low miles, and then the total cost of ownership will be less. But if you're doing high miles and you're going to keep it for a long time, then obviously buying is the best option here. And if you want to do this even cheaper and not have to pay for the depreciation, then buying something that's 2 or 3 years old is probably the best bet here. I appreciate everyone has different opinions on this. Some people like a new car, some people are willing to pay for that depreciation with the privilege of it being theirs, and I understand that. But if you want to do it cheaply, then obviously you need to buy it second hand where the depreciation has already gone. If you're working on a hybrid job, you're living in the city, you don't need a car that often, then obviously no car is probably best for you. You can avoid all these running costs. You can invest that money instead on other things. And therefore, sometimes the best decision just isn't picking the cheapest car, it's actually getting no car. If you take one thing away from this video, it's this: do the maths, the total cost of ownership and the full running costs of the car. Decide which route or which option best fits you. Please don't be pressured into anything just because the numbers kind of make sense or someone's pushing you into something. The real financial freedom isn't the car you're going to be driving. It's the cash you keep and how much money you save. If you've got value from this video, please share it. Financial literacy and education are super important to me. It isn't taught in schools, and this isn't always so straightforward because you go into things and you often solve things that perhaps are not disclosed clearly, and having that insight and understanding is super important when you're making any big decision. Buying a car is one of the most expensive things you can do, and one of the highest proportions of what people spend their money on. So you need to get the maths right, you need to be well informed, you need to make the right decisions, including all the ownership costs and the running costs. Decide which route fits your lifestyle best, and which is best for you. And I'd love to know your views on buying cars. It's a very subjective topic. People always have their opinion what the best thing is for them, and how much they should spend. So please post your comments below, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.